it's not so bad up here.
Should we turn this on?
I think. On the dot. Okay. All right, folks, thanks for coming out today. I know it's right after lunch, so hopefully we'll be able to keep you awake after you've enjoyed your repast. My name's Dominic Del Molino. I'm with Accenture Federal Services, and today here with me is Natalie Bradley, also with Accenture Federal Services. And we're going to talk about using DevOps as a way to migrate your landscape of mission-critical and legacy systems to the cloud. So without further ado, we'll get started. One of the things we've seen with our clients is that they've been able to take the easy stuff and move that to the cloud actually rather quickly. Things like email, things like file sharing, things like public-facing websites, those are relatively straightforward systems and capabilities to move to the cloud. But one of the things I think we found to be more challenging and quite frankly more interesting are some of the mission-critical systems, which are things that people have invested their time in building. They're specific to an agency. They're custom development. Maybe they're COTS code that's been wrapped and highly customized. But what we've seen is these are really challenging systems to get started moving to the cloud. I mean, you've seen that too, haven't you?
Yes.
They're the hard things. And so I want to talk about those because quite frankly, I find those to be the most interesting. And so I'm going to talk about our strategy and approach for doing that. You're going to see some technical slides about how we think that ought to be done. And Natalie's been doing this with one of our customers. I'm going to ask her to share her experiences in how that's really going and what lessons we've learned from that. Hopefully something you can take away as well. So let's take a look at the existing landscape that we're often trying to deal with when we're going to go migrating to the cloud. With custom systems, generally one of the things we've seen is there might be different program offices, different branches, different projects with their own contractors doing things their own way. And so I've got this picture here of the different color houses, and you can see they've got independent contractors maybe building the system. And then, you know, for what's the other capabilities, like QA and security?
Security's huge.
They've got different groups doing that as well, don't they? And so it can be a real challenge to really get those people to come together and figure out what it's going to look like on cloud. And so you have all these different unique systems being built separately, and then they get placed into the data center and they're run in their kind of unique fashion. And since there's so much variation with that, when security and operations inherit a system that's been built by contractors, how long does it take them to come up to speed on, you know, even understanding the posture of those systems?
It's been weeks, months, depending on the maturity of the team. It could be days, months. We've seen the whole gamut, which makes it a challenge.
Right, and so I think many of you encountered that, right? You're done developing a system, and then how long does it take to ATO it or actually get it in production? It takes a long time, and it's not because folks want to make it take that long, right? They've just been handed a snowflake system that's brand new and unique, and they have to come to grips with it and figure out how to scan it and operate it, and it takes a long time to do that. And so we don't want that problem when we go to cloud, right? We in some ways, we have the opportunity maybe to reset and do things the way we really like it to be, right? So we don't want these long cycle times and really unique systems when we go to the cloud. We don't want the problem of different standards and different kinds of systems. We want to have a nice set of standards that we can objectively validate and enforce and see, you know, that people are really complying with those. And we don't want those issues of security and operations being overwhelmed with different configurations and variations. Well, while the cloud's really flexible and you can do a lot of different things with it, we want to have some level of consistency and control so that when we go there, we're in a really nice state for it to be efficient. Right, so we could take the easy way out. Right, so if we're under a lot of pressure to migrate to the cloud quickly, we can do a quick lift and shift of the whole environment. But I put the frown face on here because I don't think that's an environment we want to live in, right? If it's the same thing we have now with the same challenges we have now, lifting and shifting might get us off our on-prem systems and into AWS faster, but we may not be able to really exploit the benefits of flexible cloud by doing so. We could go cloud native. And how long, we've seen this. How long is that going to take, do you think?
Weeks, months.
Yeah.
Months. It's going to be more.
What we've seen some people say, right, rewrite everything, right?
Yes, exactly.
Go make sure you do a 12-factor app, you rewrite your applications to be stateless, and you write everything so it's clean and green. But quite frankly, that's not going to work for all of our systems. And some systems, they're fine the way they are. We don't want to rewrite them. We just want them to work in the cloud and be more flexible there, but we don't want to have to rewrite everything from scratch and then take that whole time to do so. It just takes too long. So we think there's a potential middle ground, and that DevOps can help enable that. And so what we have here is a picture of what a DevOps framework looks like, and some of the things that we think are very valuable toward helping people migrate existing systems to the cloud. So got this picture of DevOps with a lot of different capabilities on it, but really there's 3 things on here that I want to emphasize. So the first one is, what do we do there? Fully describing the features, right?
Work with your actual teams, your users, describe what exactly you need
Yes.
to move.
So one of the things about DevOps is you have to have a good understanding of what you're going to deploy somewhere. So that's kind of the first area of fully describing features so you can rapidly deploy something. And then this bottom one, which a lot of people that we work with are excited about, is the continuous testing and integration. Right? That's an area people want to try out when they're going to cloud, right?
Sadly, it's new, but they're really eager to get there.
Yeah, the continuous. And then deploying small items frequently. So this idea of continuously deploying small increments of things that you can test and get your arms around so that you can rapidly do things over and over again, that's a big tenet of DevOps too. And we think that's really useful when going to cloud. When you have a software-defined infrastructure and environment, how do you test that? How do you make small changes to it frequently? And how do you verify that it works the way you want it to? So we like this idea that DevOps really provides some unique tooling and capability that'll make migrating to the cloud a lot easier. But before we go there, I thought maybe we'd spend a little bit of time explaining what DevOps is. So this is, I think, I looked at the agenda, the schedule, a lot of good DevOps presentations. And in this presentation, we're going to emphasize DevOps kind of writ large at the enterprise level. And so one of the challenges we've had is explaining to our clients and our customers exactly what does that mean. The developers all pretty much get this, right?
Yeah.
But when we talk to management, when we talk to their supervisors, when we explain things to operations management and security management, they want a better understanding of what DevOps really is. And so really what it's about, and I've got a picture of the 3 kind of areas here. I've got my developer who's wearing his chef hat, my security people, and she's wearing her security hat, and then my operations people, right, they've got the con, they're going to control what happens when things are running. And so really the idea with DevOps is we establish these common sources of truth that all 3 organizations can look at objectively and see transparently what's going on. And so the 3 things are a common shared secure source code repository. Where do we put all the code that creates the applications we're going to deploy? Do we have a single source of truth for that? Is it secure? Is it scanned? Is it something we can rely on? And then we want to have a common shared secure platform and vendor software repository. Big long words there, but really what I'm getting at is if I'm going to deploy something to the cloud, I need to have all the ingredients necessary to do so. Right? So it's not just the source code, it's also
all of your binaries, all of your jars, your wars, everything that depends your environment.
Yeah, all of the libraries, all of the vendor code. So when I deploy a cloud server and I bring the operating system up, what software do I need on there to then run my application code? So where do I get that software from? What versions am I using? And are they secure, right? What vulnerabilities are known with each thing? And so it's really about having that source of truth about what's the approved software we're going to allow to run in our cloud configuration, and where do we get it from? And then finally, a common shared baseline system image. And this is the opportunity I like to have for operations teams to really participate in the cloud. What does that operating system configuration look like? Is it usable? Is it something I can actually deploy to, right? And we've seen this where an operating system, the operations group will build an operating system image and I can't use it. It's locked down. It's and not something I can deploy to. And that's not going to work if I want to deploy all the time, right? And so you can see here where I've given responsibility, we've given responsibility to each group. They get a way to play. They get a way to participate in the cloud migration in a way that supports this DevOps flow of common source of truth that's used throughout the software development lifecycle so that applications are continuously built. They're continuously assembled, they're continuously baked, and verified, tested, scanned, and continuously deployed over and over again. Because on the cloud, I can do that. I can build a server in 5-10 minutes from scratch and have it started up and tell it what to put on it and take out my source code and compile it and deploy it there, run some tests. Does it work? It doesn't work, shut it down, do it again. And I do that over and over again until I feel really confident that I know exactly what's on every server and that it works correctly. And I have this ability and confidence to do that whenever I want to, so I can make sure that it's solid and secure. However, when we've done this, and we've explained that, and we're very pretty excited, now we get questions about the management teams, the managers of development teams, managers of the security operations teams, and they have a lot of concerns about, well, the developers seem to understand this, but we have some common questions. And thought I'd have you.
Yeah.
You've had to deal with this a lot more than I have. So
Yes.
what are the common questions you get?
Cost is always a huge factor. Am I going to have to stop with upgrades, new deployments, so that we can sidebar and start focusing on DevOps? What does DevOps cost me? How is it configured? Is it available? If you're a dev system and a dev tooling environment, can we rely on you? In the federal space, for those of you who've worked in there a while, a lot of your tools go away. Enterprise services just vanish. Sometimes you get notice. Things go out of life, all of that great stuff. So that was a huge dependency for managers, is to let them trust us, trust that this is going to be a stable and valuable environment.
Yeah, I think we've also seen, well, wait a minute, I thought we were doing cloud migration. What's with all these new tools and DevOps approaches? I thought, how is that going to play into what's actually helping us go to AWS? I think some other ones we've seen are, I've got some unique requirements with my system, right? And so how do we address that normally? What's the question and answer look like for that?
Kind of like, well, I'm special, I have a higher level of security, or I need more protection over my data. We've got our environment set up. You can have private and public services provided. Nobody can have access to any of your data or your source code repositories. And we have it's classified up to the highest level that developers would need.
Yeah. So this conversation is important because we can get the developers excited, but if their management team has some concerns, especially about maybe the team being distracted or maybe potentially becoming less productive during the learning curve or the introduction of DevOps tools, they're going to be less supportive of the overall effort, right? And so I think it's an important aspect of bringing enterprise DevOps to an organization, that you have to engage not just the folks doing the work, but also the management team, so they have a confidence level that you're not going to cause a big disruption and slow stuff down.
As well as security.
Yeah. Oh yeah, good point.
Briefing them as well.
So, okay. So, all right, we heard that. And so now, if we're going to establish DevOps as an enterprise capability, you're going to see some presentations throughout, I think, the summit on teams doing DevOps, and they're doing it really well inside their development environments. But we want to do this so that the whole organization can take advantage of it. And so one of the things like Natalie mentioned before is, when I have a set of enterprise tools, the question might be, am I going to be forced to use them, or are they going to make me more productive? Do they enable me to do my job, or do I have to now change everything I do and conform to a certain one way of doing things, right? So we don't want that, right? We really want to focus on enabling, right? And we want them to be reliable. So these are enterprise services to support development and operations. They need to be up 24/7. They need to be reliable. They need to be backed up. If I'm going to trust to put my source code in a repository, somebody better be backing it up, right? It's got to be reliable. It can't be a science experiment. It can't be, we're going to try some things. If I want to get and rebuild my software 20 times a day, I need to know that the repository, the Maven repo, the jar files, they're there when I need them, right? So they have to be reliable. They have to be up. They have to be secure. If I'm going to put my source code in a central location, right, it's
got to be tightened.
It's got to be tightened down. I have to feel comfortable that I'm not exposing anything that I shouldn't be, that when I log in, my credentials are tracked with my code, and my code is in a secure location that someone else can't get to, right? And so I have to feel the confidence that when I use the enterprise services, I'm not doing it through an exception process, but rather I'm complying with all of the regulations and security. That's actually something we spend a lot of time on, isn't it? We wanted to, remember we had people say, are you changing the processes?
Yeah.
Right? And so what did we tell them on that?
We're improving the processes, right?
What we would tell people was, the use of these enterprise systems does not change the requirement to comply with policy. They're being used to enable people to be more productive and faster and better at complying in an automated way, but we're not yet changing the security policies around what it means to take something from dev to test to prod, but rather in figuring out what's necessary to enable that capability to go forward.
A lot of the processes are just not ready for a fast and automated environment, but it doesn't make the process useless or invalid. So just working to get it up to where the technology is.
Yeah,
That's what
exactly.
we spend a lot of
Yeah,
time.
so that's briefing security to understand that impact. And then I think the last one is kind of true too, is that this is a commitment. It's not something in the CTO's lab, but rather these are production systems that have to have the same reliability as any other production system that supports the agency and supports the mission. Matter of fact, if all of our development goes through this kind of system, it's got to be really reliable. And so there must be an organizational commitment to establishing these capabilities, backing them up, securing them, keeping them up to date, providing support for them, making sure they're highly available. All the stuff you'd expect from any other mission critical system has to be applied to these DevOps enterprise services. Right? So that's kind of what we talk about here, is DevOps are part of a production system. The end users in this case happen to be IT professionals, not maybe the mission folks, but they're no less critical in terms of the building systems for mission. So they're the end users of that system, and you have to listen to them and provide services that they're going to find valuable. So why is this useful? Well, if you do DevOps correctly, you get this repeatable capability to build systems. Well, if I'm going to do an auto scaling group and I want to stand up 2 servers and then 4 when my workload doubles, I want those new 2 servers to be done in a repeatable and reliable way. DevOps gives me that capability to no doubt build a server the same way as I built the last one. And so that's a neat capability I want to have when I go to the cloud and when I want to do scaling. Not only is it reliable and I get the same system every time, but I can tell you what's in it. So now when I build a system, I have that manifest that says, here's the software, here's the version of this, here's the version of that. And so now if security says, well, I don't know what's on that box, I can say, fine, what do we do to the box if they don't trust us? Blow it away?
Oh, we just, yeah, throw it away.
We blow it away and we build it again in front of them. So I like to talk.
Not pets.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And then now I can do innovative stuff. If I want to try something, I can do A/B testing. I can deploy version 1.1 alongside version 1.0. I can do these very rapid deployments, so it lets me try and innovate a lot faster than I used to be able to. And if I've done the first 2 things, reliable and repeatable, I can get pretty fast. And so that's the third R I like to talk about. And then I found this quote the other day. I was on Twitter the other day, and one of the RedMonk analysts basically said, if you're going to go to the cloud and you don't have continuous integration and testing and continuous deployment, you're probably doing it not the best way you could. And he said, you're doing it wrong. I like to be a little more gentle. Right? There are better ways to do it. And so this was just something that came out this week, or last week. Okay, so how do we do this? We have something we call our DevOps enablement services. I like to call it Does It, DevOps enablement services for IT. And it's based on an open source capability that we've put out on GitHub called the Accenture DevOps Platform. And the Accenture DevOps Platform and our implementation of it, the Does It implementation, it basically takes well-known DevOps tools. And this is important. These are tools that developers understand and know from their experience out in the kind of the real world. And how do we stitch them together and integrate them together and deploy them in a secure manner so they're available for them inside the agency walls where they may not have had that access before. And so what we're talking about is around this wheel here is each of these little icons represent kind of a software capability that we deploy and configure in a secure manner, right? A secure manner, a repeatable manner, that it's based on the philosophy behind the open source DevOps platform that we have. So now we'll get to the meat here a little bit. What does it really look like? Right? So I did a lot of hand waving and talking, but I want to give you an idea of what this actually technically looks like. And so what we have here is the enterprise plane or the enterprise VPC with all of the DevOps enterprise tools configured in it. And a couple interesting things I wanted to point out here. We have a dev and a test VPC for our tools as well. And so
Eat our own dog food.
we eat our, Natalie's got it right. So why is that important, that we eat our own dog food?
It just because the way to help a developer use DevOps is to use it yourself, right? So everything we do comes in and out of DevOps itself.
Yeah, I've seen folks who do DevOps and the folks who install the tools not use the same discipline, that they're like doing this to the developer. You got to have dev and test, and you got to redo stuff, and you got to do this. And then you ask the DevOps team how they manage their stuff. I'm like, well, we're not developing tools, so we don't have to do that. I like, as Natalie said, we eat our own dog food. And what that kind of means is we practice doing repeatable deployments of these tools over and over again in dev and test VPCs, just like we tell developers to do. And in some ways, we're doing that with COTS products. So we're practicing what we preach when we talk to a team that maybe their enterprise system or mission system is a customized COTS environment, and they say, well, we can't do DevOps with that. And we say, well, that's how we test and deploy our tools, so that when you want experience or references on how to do this stuff, we often serve as our own example, which I think is really powerful, right? And so this is the environment that we have set up. We've seen customers prefer GitLab over GitHub Enterprise. We've seen Garrett. We've seen a variety of different Git-like tools.
SVN.
We don't see SVN as much.
Don't encourage that.
Jenkins seems to really be the 800-pound gorilla in the build space. We've seen Artifactory as well as Nexus, Sonatype Nexus for binary management. A lot of folks interested in Sonatype Nexus for the lifecycle management and vulnerability assessment of third-party libraries. And other services like system monitoring and log management, where we're providing not only managing our own systems, but we'll provide those as a service to teams that want to sign up and use the tools in the environment. And so we want to give these examples to teams, right, so they see that we're doing something that they might want to do themselves. So one question we get when we have this enterprise environment is, do I have to use all of it? When I want to use the enterprise DevOps services, can I just use, is it right for me? And so I tell a story, Natalie always laughs at me at this, but there used to be a commercial for the Honda Fit car, and the guy's up there, and somebody goes, can it take me to the hospital? And he goes, yes. He goes, can I take my bike in it? Yes. Can I take it off-roading? Yes. And so one of the things that we've done is, in engaging with clients on this, is we want to make sure that you can use the environment even if you don't want to use all of it. Can I just use it for source code hosting, right? Or what are some of the other folks that say, I don't want to use all of it, but...
Artifactory or Nexus is huge. They just start there. It's also not overwhelming if you can start with just a small piece.
Yeah, it lets people kind of, it's like the pool, and they have those nice ramps where you can kind of walk into the pool and you don't have to jump in and get all cold. It's like that. It's the pool ramp where you can kind of get used to the water as you're getting in. And I think that's really useful. When we tell people that, we get larger opportunity for adoption. When people say, okay, I'm not going to use all of it, but I want a taste of it, I want to try it, so how do I get, if you're not going to force me to use it all at once, how do I get started? So we designed an approach to explain that to people, and we came up with these different, we call them integration levels or service levels, or it doesn't really matter what the leveling is. Level 1 is what we call our copper service level. And so this is a team that maybe isn't in the cloud yet, and all they're doing is, what do they want to do in this case? They're just going to...
Shared source code repository.
Yeah, they just want to put their source code in the repository so they don't have to manage it anymore themselves. They know it's being backed up. They know it's reliable. They maybe want to get their binaries from Artifactory or Nexus, so they're like, can you please just proxy Maven Central for me with stuff that I'm approved to use here in the agency, and let me get them so I don't have to maintain that anymore. And that's all they're doing. This is what a copper team does. And it's not a big lift for some teams.
Yeah.
I think, what's the biggest change you see when somebody does this?
SVN to Git.
Yeah, SVN to Git, where they're moving from Subversion to a Git source code. And so this gives a team an opportunity to kind of get used to Git, used to distributed source code control, but they're not all in yet. And I think this is a nice way to get started. And we give them a sticker, right? Or basically, you're now in DevOps Enterprise and you're now a copper person. So you get to say you're playing. Next level up is Silver. And silver this is a team that maybe is more sophisticated. And what's a team like this doing?
They're replicating Artifactory, so they can actually push their artifacts to their own repository.
Yep, and looks like they've got their own build server too, maybe? Yeah.
Do we have that already?
I think so, yeah, this one here. I wish I had a
Oh,
pointer.
sorry, you do have that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is a team that maybe is more sophisticated. They're doing some of their own DevOps stuff. They have their own build server. Maybe they have their own artifact repository locally, so they're keeping track of all the versions of the software they build, and so they want a place to do that. And so they're like, okay, we're going to put our source code up in this shared GitHub location, and we're going to proxy your central, Maven Central, so we don't have to host like the common stuff. But that's all we're going to do, because we've got this DevOps thing. We're not ready to switch over to the master stuff yet. So this is what a silver team does. So they're a little more sophisticated than a copper team, right? But now the fun starts to happen. So this is gold.
This is replicating.
So what's different about gold
Artifactory.
from silver?
This is actually now depending on our tools for their build server
Yep.
and for Artifactory.
Yep. And they're doing it in
their own VPC.
In their own
which is
VPC.
huge.
So now we've got a team that says, all right, we're going to create our own VPC. We're going to have our own Jenkins slave, and we're going to have our own version of Artifactory. And can we consume those AMIs that we built?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
So now they don't have to build any of those things. They just have their own ones. One of the real benefits of this approach is they still retain a lot of control. And depending on how you've set up your Amazon account structure, they might even have a separate account, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so they're paying for their capability here. So if they want a bigger build server, they want a faster slave, they want to configure it with their own credentials or their own security.
Yeah. Far more private.
So they have a little more privacy and control. So like in the main plane, how many build slaves do we usually have up in the public
We
one?
have 4?
4?
Yeah.
So we have 4 public slaves they could use, but if people don't want to wait in line for those, or they don't think they're configured the way they'd like them, or they don't
It's
trust
not as secure. Yeah.
not putting their credentials there or their security there, they want their own build slave, that's what we let them do. They run their own build slave, they hook up to the master, they get a private folder with their group in there, controlled by LDAP groups generally, and so they have a private capability for their build jobs that run on their build server, and they deploy to their own Artifactory for artifact management. So this is a place we like people to really get to, of course. And then there's, Club Platinum, we call it, right? So this is the highest level. And so this is where someone is not only building stuff in their development environment, but they're practicing actually going out and deploying it to test and then hopefully eventually production. Now, I know these slides are really busy. There's a lot of content on them. The good news is all this is, I think, being filmed and recorded, so you can go back and look at this later. A couple other things I wanted to point out. You see the little beakers? That's Puppet. So what we want to do when we build these servers is we take the image from operations, we attach another drive to it, we use Puppet to install all the software and configuration on it, so we have a nice repeatable server configuration, right? The base image is not touched. We have an attached drive where we install software, an attached drive where we put data, and we use Puppet to configure the servers in a way that we deploy things. Most of our Puppet modules kind of wake up, they're injected via user data to start with. They wake up, they pull the artifacts from Artifactory, they deploy out to the server, and then the server comes up and is running. And so that's really a neat way to do this. And we establish the standards about how to install software on a server, how to configure software on a server. And the cool thing is, all of this is stuff that security kind of really likes, right? Because it's all well known. Matter of fact, anything deployed out to test and dev has to come from essentially an Artifactory or the source code repository. And so there's no opportunity for mischief in building a server and building the software and building the system. I talked about some of this benefit of that, right? We get the security and cost sharing benefits. You can do as big as you want for your build slaves and servers. You control your build artifacts, and you can leverage the common AMIs from the top. But really, this gives this nice balance between a team that has more money and wants to build out a bigger development environment. We let them do that, right? They're not constrained by the top level environment. So what I like about that is it lets people kind of migrate at their own pace. We have people all the way up the different scale of copper. So if this is, copper, silver, platinum, or silver, gold, platinum, we see people at all stages. And so the fast groups can go fast, The slower groups can go as fast as they can possibly go. But there's no all or nothing approach, right?
Yeah.
They all get to
do it as they want. And we've got now a year in, we're at about 150 programs at Gold, which is pretty huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
All things being considered.
I think we've got about 1,000, 1,200 some odd developers.
1,600.
1,600 developers using this environment, about 100 and how many projects?
150.
150 projects and programs. How many builds a day?
We're over 900.
1,000 builds a day.
1,000
So
a day.
so let's say we had it's 150. So 1,000 builds a day. I can't do the math in my head, but it's close to 7-ish builds a day per team. I think that's amazing. I can't imagine any other environment where I've got 100 different projects averaging 7 builds a day in a government agency. It's just that kind of adoption and explosion of capability is really, really exciting and impressive.
We had a program, the first time they ever used Jenkins, they used it to set up their daily stand-up for their Scrum meetings. And now they're pretty much a platinum team using everything in all of their VPCs.
So one of the last things I wanted to talk about is how do you help people in this? Or you can make the tools available, but that's just like step one. And so one of the things we like to do is help our clients establish a community of power users, best practices. Where do you keep that stuff? How do you share that stuff? And so I'm going to let you talk about this. You know this better than I do. What's it like
Sure.
to all of the communications and outreach that we do?
Outreach for us is huge. We do tutorials. We have what's called office hours, where we reserve a computer lab so you can sit side by side, show one of our DevOps engineers, here's the problem I have, or can you show me how to set this up? We do conferences. We have a summer series, so we do one every month. And then throughout the year, we do another 2 or 3. Tutorials are probably 2 hours of a deep dive into a tool. We constantly have articles posted. I think we have about 12 articles posted a month. But what's really exciting, we now have contributors from our community, writing articles, sharing tips, presenting at our conferences, lessons learned. So it's really rewarding, but without it, I don't know how the integration would have taken off so well.
We're really trying to make sure that if somebody figured out how to do something, they share it, and so the next team doesn't have to figure it out again. And so we do that with our own COTS tools as we're deploying them. But also what we found is as teams figure out, oh, I have this special security configuration that I need to figure out how to do, we want them to
tell everybody about it.
Tell everybody about it. And so, I mean, one of the cool things is we're almost, in some small ways, simulating kind of what the open source environment looks like out there. So you go to GitHub and you can share code and browse code and see how people did things. We're trying to bring that inside so that an agency retains the value of all the source code they have in a way that doesn't have to be repeated. And so one of the most rewarding, the first time I saw some of our scripts forked.
Yes.
So for the first time, we had our GitHub repo, and we had our own scripts, our Puppet modules in there, and someone forked it, made a change, and gave us a pull request, and we integrated it back in. And so that was just amazing to watch. Remember a team built something they wanted to share?
Yes, Artifactory?
Yeah.
Yes, so we hosted it for other people to use. They wrote an article on it, and now it's getting tagged quite frequently, I guess you could say.
Yeah, so someone built let's say a logging and audit module, and they compiled it into a jar file, and they're like, well, we'd like to share this with other people. How do we make it available? Well, we have an enterprise Artifactory where we host shared artifacts for everyone to use. So that was really a neat way for them to share that, right? And so this was all about this community of getting the development teams and project teams to share knowledge. And I think without that, it just wouldn't.
Yeah, everything we do, we put in a public repository, so people can see everything we do. We're not hiding everything. It's a complete open the kimono. And that has been really effective with other dev teams to see, okay, it's not so bad to share because people aren't copying, pasting. Plagiarism's encouraged when you're in a classified environment like that.
Yeah.
And that's been really rewarding just to see people leverage what we've done and even better it, which is pretty cool too.
Yeah, we accept contributions to make it better within the environment. So it's just, I think when you have that kind of energetic community, it gathers a life of its own, and it helps you really start to build that momentum toward moving to cloud. So I have a picture of what cloud then looks like when you're using this. It's not 100% the same, but you have teams of different maturity levels moving to cloud using an automated ability to do so in a repeated way. And I think that's a much more positive kind of environment to end up in when you migrate to AWS. So with that, we've got about 10 or 15 minutes left. I thought we'd get through that and give you all opportunity to ask questions. So it looks like there's a mic in the middle, or if you have something, I'm happy to shout out, and both Natalie and I are here to answer. So if anyone's interested, any questions? Sir. The question was Ubuntu versus Red Hat. Is that what's the question? Honestly, we're relatively agnostic for that. We're about to start hosting Yum repositories. The client doesn't have a large Ubuntu install base, but in general, none of these things would preclude that from working if there was an Ubuntu image or the Debian-style repository, the apt-get kind of stuff. So nothing would, if the client said tomorrow, we want all this on Ubuntu, I don't think we'd have a huge issue. I'm looking at my chief engineer over here going, and he just to say, no problem.
Okay.
So that would be something we could do. It happens to be Red Hat, but that's just because the customer asked for it. Other questions? Nope. Sure.
You know, you've got an enterprise that has 100 programs and projects, and I can see the government like, wow, I really want this. There's a lot of standardization, reduce costs, all that sort of stuff. But each one of those 100 projects, programs and record have their own contractors and contracts and development. They form those contracts based on IP and how we do things. Did you see a bigger resistance from, or did you notice, have you guys noticed big buy-in by the customer and their contractors and more resistance, or are they all jumping on board?
Yeah, so question was about if you have, a large agency, lots of different individual projects with unique contractors who may have won their work on their unique way of doing things or their unique IP, how does that work from an adoption and cultural perspective? I think what I like about this environment is we're not too prescriptive, and yet there are significant benefits to leveraging stuff that other people are doing. And so I think what I'm seeing is development teams that are really interested in being productive and fast will suck down as much of this as they can because they don't have to write it from scratch. And those are the clients and the contractors that have their clients' interests at heart because they just want to get it done quickly and get to mission value faster. And so they're not going to spend time rebuilding something that's maybe a generic logging and auditing component. They're going to grab that. And so there's room to be unique, but room to also leverage commonality. And I think it's realistic to think that you want a little bit of both, or a lot of as much reuse. But if there's something unique that's special, you don't want to prevent that. Right? I think so. I think most really good contractors go, oh my God, you already have the Artifactory up, and you already have Jenkins running, and you already have I don't have to install and put that in my development environment. Thank goodness, I can get started and do real value, right?
I think the resistance we saw was really from the culture change. It wasn't so much, can I share this or can I not share this, as much as it was, I have to do this every day, like constantly committing my code. And so it was more of the process that we got resistance as opposed to the collaborative shared environment and in corporate products, which was surprising.
Any other questions? I can tell you a little bit of what the future holds for this client in particular. We've started building actual development workstations now using the cloud. You heard the story, if you were in the keynote this morning, you heard the story about the World Bank where they had to evacuate an office and go to another office and were able to become productive because they had email and file sharing. What we've been able to do is do the same thing for developer workstations in developer environments. And so we've had a situation where maybe not that we ever lose power here in Virginia or in DC, but we had a situation where a building loses power and folks can move to another building, spin up their development instances on AWS and continue to be productive. And so I found that really...
We had a group of over 20 in an hour and a half. Everybody from that building that was a developer that was in C2S was able to get started right away.
Yeah.
It's also, we'll never avoid getting an account nightmare. That still takes forever. But once somebody has accounts, they're developing within hours. You're not ordering the workstation. You're not bringing in a connection. Like that nightmare is over. It's really streamlined, just getting people started.
Yeah, so we're trying to fix the problem of how hard it is to onboard a developer, right? So if any of you worked at an agency and you go, okay, I've got my development team and you're using GFE equipment to do development, you realize how challenging that can be. Generally, most agencies have a GFE desktop or laptop that's configured for office productivity, not necessarily developer productivity. And so oftentimes, depending on the agency, you'll have to request a separate workstation for development, which is double the cost now of workstations. Or you have to get special permission to unlock the office productivity workstation. That can be a challenge. So one of the ways we've tried to address that is a pre-built cloud image that has all the development tools on it already that they want. It's already hooked into the enterprise DevOps system. And so you can get a developer from like 0 to 60 as soon as they can launch it, instead of having to get their workstation kind of pre-built. And in many ways, we're applying the DevOps principles not only to servers, but even individual workstations, where if I want to provision a workstation with a certain configuration, I do that in an automated way. And so I can get a developer up more rapidly. And I think that's another neat thing we've been playing with.
And it also helps developers moving to the cloud, just gives them an interface, right? They're overwhelmed a lot with just how do I go, how, yeah. So we've now kind of consolidated that in a single desktop, made it a lot easier for them.
Yeah, all right. Great, question up front here?
So have you ever had a situation where you could either from a thin client at the local level or a local desktop basically boot to a server and have Amazon workspaces there and then have your environment set up cookie cutter for every developer for whatever customer that is or at the enterprise level?
Sure. So the question was about using enterprise or Amazon Workspaces as an example of that kind of thin client launching. In some places where the client's gone in on workspaces, we've done that, and there's some ways to transfer the big thing is usually transferring the user credentials to that. So the workstation is locked down with maybe your credentials, maybe a CAC card or PIV key or variety there, and I want to take that information and inject it to the cloud server or workstation I've just launched. And so we've done that kind of work in places where we're working with security to help them understand that we're doing that. And then you get all kinds of fun stuff like, can I launch more than one? Can I have one for 2 different projects? And so we've gotten to some really neat policy questions about what does that mean to do that. But yeah, we've done that. We've done it with workspaces in less secure environments where they're okay with workspaces. But in general, we'll do just a generic Linux desktop and RDP into it using the remote desktop protocol. Question here?
Yeah. I was curious about what you're doing for VPC peering with cross account or cross VPCs. If Jenkins slaves are deployed in that environment with public IP, or if you're doing that through VPC peering or some other sort of secure networking aspect.
Great question. Can you help me with that one?
Typically what we end up doing is we don't end up doing a peering. A lot of times it's just done through a standard IP kind of communication across the two. But because of the infrastructure that we have, there's a lot of communication. We've fully encrypted the communication between the slaves and the masters themselves. So everything across the wire, even though it's in the cloud, has all been encrypted.
Yeah, so we've been very careful to make sure that if we do that cross communication between the slave and the master, that we're abiding by the encryption requirements and the security nature of the connection, so to make that happen. And so we don't have to do the VPC peering. We actually just kind of do the standard network routing, but we're doing it in a way that looks familiar and compatible to the network and security folks.
Light is down.
Good. All right, question up front here.
Yeah, is this a Gov Cloud environment or is it a level 4, level 2? What is it?
We've been doing this inside the classified environment, the
Level 4.
the C2S environment, which is, I think,
Level 4.
Level 4, yeah.
We have started replicating as much as we can the environment on open Amazon so that we can give developers an opportunity to work with certs, work with limitations, security boundaries that they see on the more classified network. We just started that a couple months ago.
Yeah, so
And that's just US
simulating the
East
security
region.
posture of the higher environment in a lower environment, so they get used to it.
The easy question, have you had that environment certified on Amazon East
Certified.
by security?
Oh, by our security, we're actually doing that right now.
Okay.
We're not accrediting AWS, obviously, but the access controls and the mechanisms with which we're using, yes, we're doing that right now.
Yeah, I mentioned before the importance of this being a production system. The inside on the Amazon GovCloud area that we're working on, we got ATO for that system as a production system. So we went the extra mile to say these development tools are a production system, and we went through the whole process, just like we'd make anyone else do, to get an ATO and get it secured, because we thought that was an important demonstration of commitment.
We're in a whole new world, though, of classifying an unclassified environment, but we are, we're definitely trying
Question
that.
here? Yeah. Yeah, so the question was about if you had a pre-existing application that wasn't cloud, and how long did it maybe take them to use this technology and get to cloud. We have some good examples of that. And it ranges because it depends on the complexity of the system. But I think the most, we had a team just present recently about how now they're all in on this.
They have over, I think, 45 different applications, so they're still in that progress, and it's taken months. They got stood up, fully integrated on DevOps to run the two in parallel in a week. They're still learning the behaviors and all that kind of stuff with DevOps, but they were doing one app at a time, and depending on the complexity, the apps were a lot faster. Some of their stuff they did have to push to the right because the complexity of the data itself. But I think on average, the smaller apps are just a couple weeks. Because it's the maturity of the team.
Yeah.
And
I just laugh when it's weeks, because I think a lot of us are used to months and years.
Yes.
So weeks is like,
Weeks
oh my
is
gosh.
yes.
So I'd venture a guess that we're 6 to 18 months for any system of significant size.
Yeah.
But I think that's pretty fast. It's pretty good.
The good thing too is if you're leveraging services that are accredited, your security timeline is shortened. So if you're starting from something you've completely homegrown on your own, that's like, if you're lucky, that's 9 months. But I mean, we got our system accredited because we were using a cloud that was accredited. We were using an OS that was accredited. So we did it in 3 months for 2 networks, and we're seeing teams being able to even shorten that by utilizing our dev tools and the environment as well. So security is really your hurdle in the learning curve, of course.
Good. Question here.
Are you aware of any groups doing this kind of thing for a DoD type of environment?
So the question was, are we aware of any in the DoD environment? I think we've had interest from DoD customers who are kicking the tires on because they have access to it. But I don't know if we have anyone full on yet. But we are deploying, actually that's not entirely true. I know in the Air Force, we've deployed the DevOps open source platform. So there are some pockets in DoD that are starting to do the same thing. Other questions? I think we're coming up on time. So I wanted to thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of the summit.
Thank you.